Okay, so we want to give you a quick tutorial on how to fill out the new CPHS application. And so when you go to the CPHS website and fill out and pull up the application, you will see this document which we've annotated. So the first thing you'll see is the IRB review date, and that's for the CPHS person to fill in when they're actually evaluating your application. You're going to put in your title, and you're going to put in your proposed project end date. And typically we want to put the semester you plan to graduate. These applications are only good for 1 year, but if you put that 2 or 3 years out into the future, you will get notices at each year to update your CPHS application. Here it says, and then you have your principal investigator, you don't need that. Here it says faculty sponsor. Here you can put your chair, but email to make sure, and you could put your methodologist, either your quantitative or your qualitative. Your name goes here with the UHCL email, alternate email, etc. When this is about your funding, and you can ignore this. And then you come down here and it says data collection, it says from, and here you'll put from CPHS approval, so because you won't know what this date is, right? So you're just going to say when it gets approved, that's when it starts, and then here you can put, so like it says here, approvals last for 1 year, but you may want to take your best guess at when you'll complete your dissertation and put that date. So just make it be the same as the proposed end date up above. Human subjects description. I'm going to let Dr. Orange take over.
So here you're kind of taking your best guess at who your participants are going to be. So think about what you have in your population and sample and your participant selection sections. For age range, go as far down as you think it might potentially go, as well as far up as it could potentially extend. So if you are researching teachers, you would probably pick 22 to 65 is your range. For your percentage of male and percentages of female, again, you're doing your best guess here. If you are working with K-12 teachers and your group seems to be a higher percentage of females than males, you can make your numbers reflect this. If you're not sure what you're potentially going to get, it might be 50-50. So again, nobody's going to come back and double check and say, oh, well, you said it was going to be a 40-60 split, but it's really 30-70. You can't use your data. Just take your best guess and pick what seems appropriate based on what you know about your sample and your participants. So in the background and significance section, one of the key words here is concise. So your reviewer doesn't want to read through your whole lit review. They don't want to read through your whole chapter 1. So take 1 to 2 paragraphs and give the high-level overview of what it is you want to do for your project and why you want to do it. You will have a few citations in here. Anything that you cite, make sure you also include the reference, but please, please, please don't cut and paste your entire list of references for your whole dissertation here. Just include the ones that you cite above. For specific aims, again, be brief. We need to know the purpose of your study, your research questions. If it's appropriate to have hypotheses, you can include those, but you don't have to. Not all research questions need them. Tell us what your goals are. And anything else that might be relevant for your reviewer. Don't assume that your reviewer knows your topic. And so if you need to explain a little bit more, define things, please do that as well. For your research methods and design and procedures, you need to be really detailed here. Just like we tell you in your chapter 3 to write it in enough detail that somebody could go out and conduct the study, you need to do that here as well. Your reviewers aren't familiar with your study. Often they don't know who you are, and so they don't have the benefit of all the background information that sometimes your professors have. So be very clear about how you're going to conduct this study. So if you're doing surveys, tell us how you will get email addresses to email out your survey links. How long will it take approximately for participants to complete the survey? Things like that. For your qual part, you would want to do that same thing with the same level of detail if you're doing interviews, focus groups, observations. It often helps, just like in your chapter 3, to split this out by the method that you're using. So you might have a subheader for surveys, you might have a subheader for interviews, and then be detailed in each section. You also will need to explain how you're going to analyze your data. So you don't have to go into a lot of detail here. If you're using t-test descriptive statistics for your quant, say that. For your qual, since it tends to be a bit wordy when you talk analysis, you can just say, I'm going to use an inductive approach to data analysis and use in vivo, or something relatively simple. But you do need to include something there that lets folks know how you will analyze that data.
Okay, so for instruments for research with human subjects, if you're using a survey or if you're using the STAR test or an assessment, here you'll need, if you're using a survey, you're going to want to attach the survey items. You also want to talk about the reliability and validity of that survey and cite where you got it from. If you're talking about the STAR test, you don't need to attach the entire STAR test, but you do need to include the reliability and validity for the STAR test or any other assessment that you're using. I'll let Dr. Orange talk about the qual.
Okay, so for the qual piece, you will need to include a list of your potential questions that you're going to ask participants. You can cut and paste them here. You can attach it as an appendix. I say potential because, as we know, sometimes those questions shift a little bit. What we look at when we review is the topics. And so we want to know how sensitive they are. If you are researching something that's potentially a very sensitive topic, we're going to pay closer attention to how you're protecting your participants compared to something that's a little safer. Like if you're asking people about their instructional approaches, that's not considered something high risk. And so we do need to see your questions, but again, there's nothing that says you can't deviate from those a little bit when you're actually collecting your data. This is also the only time you will ever put anything qualitative in an instrumentation section. So that's a little bit different, but you do need to include any sort of data collection tool you're going to use in this section.
Okay. And I'll also let you talk about this part.
Okay. So here you need to be specific about your participants. So any characteristics that they might have. Are you working with teachers, students, administrators, professors? Take your best guess as to number, age, gender, etc. State of health doesn't tend to be relevant for our participants, but there are some studies where it might be, so include that as needed. Tell us how you're going to get your hands on these people. So lots of times people will say in their applications that I'm going to email my survey link to participants, but they never explain how they're going to get their email addresses. So explain that step in the process here and above in your data collection section. So if you're going to be selecting on certain criteria, make sure you're clear on that. Also make clear that you will exclude for certain criteria. So if you are looking for novice teachers, you would need to explain how you're going to define novice. If you're doing it their first 5 years, you would say that. That means you would exclude anybody who has more than 5 years of teaching experience. Again, this is something that you need to be specific about and explain why are you making the choices that you are. If you are working with children, you do have some slightly different guidelines that come into play because they are a vulnerable population. And so take a peek at the guidelines referenced here. Also know that you will need both permission from the students that you are working with as well as their parents if they're under 18. And if you go to the CPHS website, you also see different assent and consent forms depending on the age of student participants.
Okay, so that takes us into informed consent. If you're using a survey, you will need the survey cover letter, which is not the same thing as the informed consent form. So for CPHS, you actually need it in a Word document that you can attach. When you're in Qualtrics, it will typically be the first thing that you present to your participant. and then they click the arrows at the bottom, and you have a language in there that says by clicking these arrows you give consent. But for CPHS, they're not looking at your Qualtrics, so they need a document that says the same verbiage as what you'll say in your survey itself. So that's what we call the survey cover letter, which is not the same thing as the informed consent form, which is for the qualitative.
So for your informed consent forms, they are all available on the CPHS page. Pick the one that's appropriate for you. You'll also see on that page that there's a special section for education. And so we have some that are modified a little bit from some of the normal ones, just because we work with student populations so much more frequently. You might also need to translate the documents if you're working with participants who don't speak English as their first language. There are a couple that are translated into Spanish, but if you are working with people who speak other languages, it's kind of on you to make sure those are translated appropriately. It's okay if you do your data collection in Spanish, French, whatever language your participants are most comfortable in. Just make sure the consent form matches what they're going to understand the best. When you are filling out these forms, especially the part where you're telling the participants about what they're going to do, please do not just cut and paste from your dissertation. Your participants don't care what the literature says. They don't care really about the goals of your study. They want to know what they're going to do. So write it like you're talking to them. You can say you, I, you can use all of that in there. Remember, the goal of this is so that your participants understand what they're going to be asked to do. So you need to put it in language they understand. This isn't a place to be impressing people with your academic words. So just make it clear.
Okay, and then we just have a couple of other sections. Confidentiality. You want to use pseudonyms to protect the identities of your participants, and you can include that. There's sort of boilerplate language that you'll see in other dissertations about how you store data on your computer. You can say it will be stored on a password-protected computer. Basically, the goal is to show the reviewer that you understand that you need to keep the data safe and show them that how you plan to do that. Benefits. Basically the rest, it's our studies rarely have direct benefits to participants, so you can say that. Make sure you have a sentence or two on the expected general results. I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So let's see. We've got
the expected results.
Expected results, you're really taking a guess here. And I dislike the section for qual because often I don't want you to go in with expected results. It can bias your data analysis, but jump through the hoop here, or talk about what you expect to see in your quant potentially. We just need to see something included. Again, no one's going back to check this, and sometimes our results surprise us. And then our last part with any other sites or agencies. So if you are collecting data in partnership with another group, you will need a site letter from them. If you are going to another institution, whether it's K-12, community college, university, whatever, you need a site letter. It needs to be a PDF, signed, and on letterhead. That process can be quite lengthy. Sometimes other institutions will require you to go through their IRB first to get approval before they will give you a site letter. So if this is something that you need, reach out to the institution you'll be working with and see what their process entails. We can't approve you until we have a site letter, and so that's something that you have to include here. If you are not working directly with a site, let's say you're interviewing teachers and you're taking them from multiple districts, campuses, you wouldn't need a site letter. If you don't have a site letter, though, you are not going onto their campuses, you are not working with them during contract hours, so you need to be very mindful to, I guess, do all of your data collection outside of anybody's work hours if you don't have a site letter.
And additionally, you shouldn't be using their work emails either, so you should be using their personal emails. We did skip over risks. Basically, you can just say that you don't anticipate any risks to the participants, unless you think there are risks. And if there are, you need to state them there. But
And think about that through the lens of your participants. As researchers, we sometimes don't see the risks because we don't see them as being anything huge, but think about how your participants might feel put at risk potentially and try to view it through their eyes more so than your own.
so basically, in summary, all these ones that are red, these are the ones that you need to have some verbiage in. And when you submit the final application, you will submit this application, you will submit your city certificate that shows you've been through the city training, you will submit your faculty supervisor's city training certificate, you will include the informed consent letter, you will include the copy of your survey or instrument, you will include the copy of your interview protocol, and the site letter. I think that's it. So it's a lot to gather, but you won't get approval until you have all of those documents.